Our epistle reading today is taken from the book of Romans, chapter 13. Romans 13 and verses 8 through 14. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your life today in this reading from Romans chapter 13, beginning at verse 8. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves the other has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this one word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of the light. Let us live honorably as in the day, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. May God bless to our understanding this reading from God's holy word, and to God's name be glory and praise. Have you ever caught that line in Romans before? Owe no one anything except to love one another. This is a whole different take on the concept of love, isn't it? Love as a debt. Love as something that you don't just give to the people you want to love or the people you feel like you're supposed to love, but love as something that you try to give to everyone because you owe it. Love is a debt that we owe to the world, for having been recipients of all the good stuff this world has given us, the goodness, the beauty, the plenty, the peace, its many joys. If you've known little or no love in this life, then you'll have little or no love to give. You don't owe as much. It's not a regressive tax like the tax you pay on gasoline or cigarettes if you smoke, where everybody pays the same amount. No, it's a progressive tax where those who have more pay more. That's the way the debt of love works. The more you have, the more you give. And in fact, the more you have, the more you want to give. And the more you give, the more you have. That is the joyful debt of love. Of course, one way to think about love, if you want to think about it as a debt, is to look at those places in the world and those individuals where love was owed but never received. Places where the debt did not get paid. You probably know somebody in your life or have known somebody who did not receive that debt early on and spent the rest of their lives looking in all the wrong places to get that debt paid off. I bet you could think of 2 or 3 people who fit that description. The wonderful novel A Feather on the Breath of God by Sigrid Nunez, like so much of our best fiction, is about the immigrant experience in America. It is not a religious book in any way, though I have to admit I bought it for the title. Have you ever done that? A Feather on the Breath of God. How was I supposed to resist this title? Maybe you could. But it's not a religious book. It speaks about the fleeting nature of life, fluttering, drifting, finally falling softly to the earth. It's about a lonely girl who lives in the public housing in Brooklyn, and she tells the story of her life, not by talking so much about herself, but by giving you these long character sketches of the 3 biggest players in her life: her father, her mother, and her lover. And I say lover because this was not her boyfriend. He was married to somebody else, actually. Can you imagine if you wanted to tell us who you were, but instead of talking about yourself, you told us about your father? and your mother and your partner. There's no plot. There's just 3 rich, detailed, funny, but painful descriptions of the people who shaped her. In fact, you never even learn the main character's name. You learn all about these other 3, but she never even tells you what her name is. Her father, Chang is distant and unhappy. Chang is Chinese, but born in Panama. And as a child, he was sent back to China to live with an aunt who really didn't want him. And now he raises his 3 daughters in public housing in New York. But he only speaks a few phrases of English. And because he never talks to his kids, they never learn Chinese. He's a total stranger to his own children, the eternal outsider. The girl knows almost nothing about him, except that her mother and he seem to hate each other. They stay married, they're still married, but they fight all the time, even if his end of the fight is limited to such remarks as, "Stupid woman," "crazy lady." He works 3 jobs and dies young. That's her father. Her mother, Krista. Now there's a complicated character. She met the father at the end of World War II. She's German, and she married him just to punish her own parents, who were rigid Catholics. She's German, but now she's living in the public housing in Brooklyn. And Krista just misses home. She wants to go back to Germany. She's haunted by memories of the cold and the hunger and the violence during the war. She lives with trauma, but unlike Chang, she talks about it. She'll tell you all her woes, and she'll talk to her children about all of her disappointments in life. She tells her kids all her miseries, and she dominates their lives in every way. She's opinionated, she's forceful, she's deeply haunted and broken, and the girl adores her. Krista is always telling her husband, "You know, I had another boyfriend. I had another boyfriend named Rudolph, and I should have married him." It's kind of an awful thing to do to your kids. I wish I'd married somebody who wasn't your father. You wouldn't be born, but I'd be happier. That's Krista, the mother. And then finally, you've got the girl's Russian lover, Vadim. Vadim is married with kids at home. He's a man of questionable character, obviously. He's possibly a war criminal. There's stuff we don't know about Vadim. There's always vodka on his breath, and contrary to popular belief, yes, you can smell vodka on a person's breath. And he uses hard drugs. He might just be a drug dealer, actually. He's probably a gangster. There's speculation that he may have killed his wife's father. Vadim gets into fights, and he hurts people, and he steals things, and he lies. Back in Russia, he tells the girl nonchalantly he had to drown some kittens in the bathtub because he didn't want them. And he says it as if everybody does this. She's a little scared of him, and she only leaves him when it becomes clear that he was secretly pimping out some destitute Russian women. At the end of the book, though, the girl remembers a time when she saw her own withdrawn father, Chang, come alive. Somewhere in Brooklyn, he met some Chinese children, and these kids thought Chang was the greatest guy on earth. He played with them, and he told them jokes and stories in Chinese, and he let them hang all over him. And the unnamed main character looks at her sister and says, "He never played like that with us." And she goes on to say, "Some things it would be death to forgive." And when her therapist asks her, "Why do you stay with this Russian thug, this Vadim, this dangerous guy?" and she has to admit, because Vadim, the Russian gangster, makes her feel seen, makes her feel valued, makes her feel beautiful, makes her feel wanted, makes her feel loved. The debt of love. If we don't get it from the sources that are good and healthy, if we don't get it from the places where we're supposed to get it, we will seek it from anywhere. We will try to fill that debt from other places. If it is not paid from the good and healthy sources, we will seek payment by some other means. Now, don't ask me how it happened that I am preaching from Romans again, for the second time in recent memory. I think maybe Paul and I are inching back into each other's lives. Paul, the writer of the book of Romans. Romans is really where Paul lays out his long, complex theology of atonement and salvation. But from chapter 12 through chapter 16, and we're in 13 here, he's just wrapping things up and saying goodbye. And this is Paul's way. He will give all the advice that he didn't think to give earlier in the book. He'll cram it all in at the very end. And then it ends up taking him 5 chapters to say goodbye. But because we're friends again, I'm not going to point that out. 5 chapters just to say goodbye. He's throwing in a lot of advice here that he didn't get to early on. And among the bits of advice that he says, pay your debts, don't owe anyone anything. And don't forget that love is a debt. If you have been loved, you owe love. If you have received love, that's not yours to keep, it's yours to share. Love is a debt. Not just something we do when we want to, for whom we want to. It's a debt that we owe back to the world. We don't think of debts as good things, do we? The word debt is not one of those pleasant words in our language. Many of us, aging Gen Xers and every generation after us, will be paying off our student debts for years and perhaps decades to come. And then there's credit card debt, and there are car loans, and there are mortgages on our homes, and the alternative to that is rent. There's home improvement loans and monthly bills, and predatory lenders tempt the poor into ever deeper debt with the promise of fast, easy cash before payday. And that promise can be hard to resist if you don't have medical insurance, or if the rent is due and you're late, or if Christmas is coming and you just want your kids to have a normal life, to have what other kids have. Our society thrives on debt. Debt is just assumed. I've told you this before. When I got back from Africa, I thought I had perfect credit. I thought I had the perfect credit rating. My only debt was student loans, and I'd been paying those. I did not owe a nickel to anybody. That doesn't give you perfect credit. Not owing money doesn't give you perfect credit. It should, but it doesn't. It was a rude awakening for me to learn that in the values of our society, being debt-free is not a good thing. Having debt is what makes you trustworthy. You can only have good credit if you're in debt already. You can only make a major purchase if you already owe money on some other purchase. How did this become our lives? How did this become the way we live? How is this normal? I am exceedingly proud of the mission committee of this church for spearheading a synod-wide campaign, which is taking off throughout the synod. The synod is a group of presbyteries. It's all of Pennsylvania, most of West Virginia, some of Ohio. The Synod of the Trinity. Our congregation is spearheading a campaign to help people without medical insurance pay off their medical debt and to get other churches in the synod to join in. Think about it. This includes the urban poor of Philadelphia and the rural poor of West Virginia, as well as our neighbors right here. In the eyes of society, our debts define us. Our honesty and our worth can be measured in them. Debt is always a moral issue. But what about our moral debts? What do you owe to that public school teacher who saw something in you and encouraged you the right direction? How are you ever going to pay that back? We all have one, don't we? One teacher who really did well by us, maybe two. How do you pay that back? If you are able to trust, to care, to love, it's because somebody in your life, probably a parent early on, treated you with gentleness and affection. How do you repay that? Is there any way to repay that? And they didn't do it to create a debt in you, though. No, I'm not going to say that. They didn't do it to create a debt in you. They did it simply because they loved you. And why did they love you? Because somebody loved them. That's the way it works. I wish I knew how to repay the person who decided that the 16th Street Bridge should be beautiful. Because we got a lot of ugly bridges in this city. It's nice to have one that's nice to look at, with the beautiful scroll work in the stones and the big yellow horses coming up out of it. It's a graceful thing. And somebody decided that the public should have a right to parks and libraries and streets and electricity. I know certain of those robber barons became philanthropists in hopes of paying off some of their sins. But still, we receive so much in this life. We receive so much more than we could ever give back. We are the casual recipients of relationships and of colors and of flavors and of laughter and of skills and of passions and of life itself. And we have these wondrous bodies with which to travel through this wondrous world and experience its joys. We have voices to speak and to sing, and eyes to see it and to shed tears for it. For that's a beautiful privilege too. Most of all, we have love. We have love that we did not create within ourselves. It was put there. It's a debt that we have to share. Love has been sowed into the seed, like a seed into the soil of our lives, and the crop is not ours to hoard. It is meant to be shared. You and me, we owe love. Yes, to anyone who has ever loved us, obviously, and the only way to pay back is to love them back, but also to love ourselves, because they won't always be there, but they want us to be taken care of, and they did invest their love in us. And so we owe it to them to love ourselves. And we owe it to God to love those who never loved us, those who couldn't possibly love us, because they weren't given enough love to start with. Of those to whom much has been given, much shall be required. We owe love to every creature with whom we share this gift of life, whether they can pay us back or not. We owe love to those who will come after us and who rely on us to give them a planet that is livable and as good as the one that we got. We owe love. Love is not a privilege that we reserve for the select few. It's our duty to the world, to those around us, to a world that supplies all our needs. Doing what you love and loving what you do, that's a pretty good way to love the world, isn't it? Owe no one anything, Paul says, except to love one another. Love. The more you have it, the more you have, the more you give, and the more you give, the more there is running free out there in the world, making the world better. The saintly Mary Oliver, whom I quote about once a month, she says this: "My work is loving the world. My work is loving the world. And it is the work of this church and of anyone who has ever been loved. It is a joyful life that feels indebted to God and to the world." How are you going to begin, just begin, to pay off that debt? Amen.